Morning everybody. Got another quick project to do here. The purple truck's at the paint shop and kind of waiting on some parts for it, and just had a little bit of spare time, so going to do a quick project here on this 93 379 Pete. It's already a pretty decent truck. Got a little 36-inch bunk and about a 300-inch wheelbase and stuff. But we're gonna put a air ride suspension kit on it. This is a Jimmy Ferrell kit. You can see this truck, like I said, it's had a fair amount done to it, but when you look at the stance at the front, you know, it stands pretty tall. So we're gonna do something about that and try to get that bumper a little closer to the ground. All in all, like, for its age, truck's pretty nice. They've got newer doors on it. They made them suicide. In order to make more of a chopped look, they actually made taller panels for the doors. None of this was my doings. We got our cab mounted mirrors, chopped air cleaners. It's got a newer bunk that matches the newer doors. The customer himself made the interior door panels, sewed those up himself. I thought that was pretty cool. Pretty nice truck, but we're going to make it a little nicer. I'll open up this air ride kit and we'll go through it and see what all a Jimmy Ferrell kit for a 379 looks like. So under the paperwork there is a template that shows you where the holes need to be drilled in the frame, along with the template, with the directions that the template needs to be laid on the frame. A lot of these parts are Ottoman parts, but he's either picked good parts or modified them so they will be trustworthy, because you can't trust all those Ottoman parts. There's the bag setup, and then next is the springs. These are factory air ride 389 springs. You got to buy the factory 389 springs for the 379s for this setup. Yes, this is another Peterbilt with a Detroit on it. As we look at the steer suspension here, you can see it's just got your normal 12,000 pound leaf springs in it. They've removed the blocks, and so those leaf springs are sitting on a shim, sitting on the axle. It's dropped as much as it can go with the stock parts. So we'll be removing the current leaf spring and putting some 389 springs in its place. It's a pretty unique, pretty cool setup that Ferrell came up with to do this, and so I'm eager to get one under my belt. First thing we gotta do is get those fiberglass cowl panels out from under the cab and out of our way. The whole deal with what makes this air ride so nice and works so well is that long 389 leaf spring that we're using. It's actually about 8 inches longer than the 379 spring, but that means that our belly bar right there, it's in our way, and we need to move it back behind the new leaf spring. And so took it out of the way there, and now that fuel filter's in our way, we're going to drop that, loosen that up, and deal with that later. And so we're basically starting out, we're going to drop the axle out of the truck completely and work on setting up the frame for the springs, and then we'll go back and attach the axle after the springs are all in place. Got our front spring pins there. They're held in by some like 4-inch bolts that they go through grooves in the pin to hold the pin in place. So we just got to take all those out, and usually I take the bumper off to do this. Makes it easier, but in this case that bumper is going to be a real pain to remove and reinstall. So got the bolts out. I'll take the pins out later. Now taking the rear hanger off of the frame rail. I will be taking the pins out later, but it's a whole lot easier just unbolting the hanger from the frame rather than dealing with the spring pins at this time. As I said, the leaf spring's 8 inches longer, so naturally that means that we got to move the rear spring hanger back 8 inches, which in the instructions they say 7 7/8, but that's basically that's moving the spring hanger back to where the belly bar was, and use that top bolt for the belly bar bracket for the top bolt for the spring hanger. You can see right there exactly how far you're moving it back. And so I'm marking my holes for those two bottom bolts, and then I've scribed a line between the original belly bar bolts to get that vertical, and then measure and double check my my markings side to side to make sure that spring hanger is going to be sitting perfectly, perpendicular on that frame rail. Drill those out. Now, as far as the belly bar, we're moving it back 7 7/8 of an inch is what the instructions said, and that's what I started out doing on this. And there's a bracket on the inside of the frame rail for the engine mount, and there's holes in it, and ideally you're wanting to hit the center of that existing hole in the bracket. And when I did that on the passenger side, I did that first, and the hole was back too far. You can see my first hole versus the second hole that I had to drill that actually hit center of the bracket hole. And so for this particular setup is like 7 11/16, I think. That put it in the correct spot. So that hanger on the left is the one from Ferrell. It's a steel hanger, and it's got that real heavy bronze bushing in it. Now this one on the right here, that's an aluminum one that I keep in stock, but it's got inferior bushing kinda. I'm not sure why Ferrell put that heavy bronze one in, that homemade bushing, but it's definitely better quality. Anyway, that's what you're getting from Ferrell, is a steel hanger with that nice heavy bushing. So here we're just bolting in that spring hanger, and following that we'll bolt in the belly bar. That bottom bolt on the belly bar was really hard to get a nut on. It was possible, but your engine mounts are right there, and so it's hard to get a wrench on that nut. So I positioned railroad jacks under the frame to support it so that I could keep the truck up in the air at a decent height while dropping the steer axle down to the point that the suspension's fully stretched out and the tires are just barely off the ground. At this point, the only thing holding that steer axle in the truck whatsoever is the U-bolts. So I'm gonna stick a jack stand underneath the tie rod bar so that the weight of the axle doesn't flip it backwards as soon as the U-bolts are cut. Once those U-bolts are cut, we'll finish removing the spring hanger off of the frame, and we can pull the whole leaf spring and hanger assembly out of the truck on each side. They give us a fancy metal template that lays out where the holes need to be drilled in the frame to hold the upper side of the airbag setup, and it has set level with the bottom of the frame and pushed up into the front spring hanger bracket. You can tell I clamped that metal in there for it to set on, be flush, and pushed it into place. After marking those holes, there's plenty of room on the frame rail and stuff where I drilled some 1/4-inch pilots and then bored them out with the magnetic drill there. Now, the springs originally come with 389 type pins and bushings, which are like a single unit deal. And so you push those out, and then he sends new bushings that you press into the springs. And actually, the bushings that he sends a sleeve that goes around them, because the bushings that are the correct ones for the pins are a little too small for the springs. So there's a little bit of a spacer in there that you push into the spring, actually. And then it just installs like normal, grease on the pin and on the bushing, and then there's some washers that go on either side of the spring, big old washers that also they go on the back side between the shackle and the spring, and between the shackle and the spring hanger. And so you just grease up every part that touches and moves. You can see those big washers right there. Make sure I get them greased well on both sides. Then we put the shackle on it, and if there's any slop in the rear in any direction, you're going to start feeling and hearing the movement there. So if your pins and bushings are worn, you'll feel it. But also, if there's side-to-side play in it, you'll feel it. And a lot of times, you know, when you're making a slow, hard turn or something, you'll feel a popping through all the way through the steering wheel and stuff. You know, a lot of times it's because your pins and bushings are worn out, but sometimes it's because there's end play on it. So, you know, once you got the whole deal assembled, what I'm doing right now, don't just tighten up those pinch bolts. Before doing that, you need to put a big C-clamp on it and draw those shackles together, you know, awfully tight, honestly. And then with the clamp still on it, you tighten down your pinch bolts, and that eliminates any excess side-to-side slop. Just makes everything quieter and firmer, makes for a better ride, honestly. So that's something that sometimes if we can't see up or down slop in the bushings from prying on them and stuff, but they're still complaining about popping and noises and stuff, sometimes we can make it go away just by putting the clamp on there. So again, the belly bar got moved back. That means that our hood guides got moved back 8 inches as well. So you can see there's the original guide, and then there's the bracket that comes in the kit that's made to move that original bracket, that original cup forward. You got to cut the original bracket and then drill it and bolt it onto the new bracket. On the driver's side, my fuel filter was a clearance issue, obviously, you can see, so I did have to cut and modify that just a little bit to make some room for the filter. And so while I'm doing this and we're watching me, here's a good time for me to ask you the riddle of the day, the joke of the day. So the question is, how do you think the unthinkable with an iceberg? So here we got the bottom bracket off, and we're going to put that on top of the leaf spring and put our U-bolts down through that bracket and through the axle. Sometimes this can be a little challenging because you got to line up all these different pieces. You got to have your shim in place between the spring and the axle, and then there's your centering pin and your leaf spring that has to go into the hole on the axle. And this first side, it went fairly quickly for me. It really didn't give me much trouble. But the driver's side, I will admit, you know, I had to fight with it just a little bit to get it to all assemble together with the hole in the right spot. You can see there, I put some oil on the threads of the U-bolts. You want to make sure that both sides of your washer has oil on it. That just all reduces friction so that when you torque it, you get the proper stretch on the U-bolts once it's torqued. If it's dry, then you're going to reach torque way before that U-bolt stretches. And you know, even after this is out on the road, we're going to want the torque on those U-bolts to be checked, you know, after, you know, half a week to a week of driving, depending on how much they're doing, and just re-torque them, make sure it stays the same or stays tight. Often they need to turn some more. They stretch a little bit after a little bit of use. You can see there we got the spring between the axle and the shim between the axle and the spring. The fat side goes on the back. Typically when you're doing this sort of stuff, it's a 4-degree shim, and you want to use a bronze one that's rated for the application, not an aluminum one. Those are not made to carry the weight. They'll wear and they'll get smashed. Now you can see here, like every custom job, you run into something unexpected that you're not supposed to, and in this case the catch can for the blow-by is right in the way of the airbag setup. So I did have to cut down the bracketry on that and re-drill it and shift it and move hoses in order to get that catch can far enough away that I felt comfortable the airbags weren't going to rub against it. And here we are, just, you know, installing the bolts in the holes we drilled earlier. Nothing too complicated there. Now you can see I got it all bolted up here, but once it's all tightened down and everything, I think you'll be able to see in the video, I pulled up on the shock, and the shock was too short to reach. I had to let the suspension down before I could get the shock completely mounted up. On the other hand, the way that the package came, the linkage was kind of loosely bolted together for the leveling valve, and so I left it the way it was, and it reached sitting there with the bags extended in the position that they're at right now. I wasn't thinking or paying attention, and so when I let the frame down so I could get the shock on, I let it go down pretty much all the way, and I wasn't thinking about the leveling valve linkage, and it ended up bending it because it is way too long. So when you do this, you want to just unbolt your linkage like it is in the video right now, you can see, and leave them separate and let the suspension down, and that way you're not maxing out that linkage travel and bending it all up. It wasn't a big deal, just had to take them off and put them in the vise and straighten them out a little bit, but yeah, it is something that, you know, I should have been paying more attention to before doing that. On this truck, I ended up deciding, you know, I think this is what the instructions were getting at, mounting the air solenoids that control the airflow to and from the leveling valve, from the control switch. The most convenient place to put it is basically that front cross member for the engine. There's a couple small 1/4-inch bolts that hold a bracket there, and so I just took the nuts off those, and I was able to put the bracket holding all the air valves onto those two bolts. That's the most convenient. And then just running some air line, kind of got to run it loosely at first, and then start, once you get them kind of ran, zip tying them up and then cutting them to more precise length once you got the routing where you want it and you got everything protected from wear spots. Just trying to figure out the routing, then cleaning it up as you go. And you can see I put some frame protectant strips on the edge of the frame rail for where the air lines go over that edge there, keep them from wearing through. And in the end, we ended up with 2 air lines that have to go up to the dash, to that switch in the dash, and then I just robbed air supply for the switch from the other air switches in the dash. And you can see it there, that air switch there, 3-position switch. You got a normal ride height, an override where you can lift it higher than normal ride height, and then you got a deflate position. So you can see us playing with it right here. That's with the suspension dumped as low as it'll go. You can stick the toe of your boot underneath of it. I'm not sure if you can get it all the way under, but it's about that height. So something we really got to take careful measure of and watch is on these trucks with the aftermarket fenders, with the dropped edge fenders. You got to make sure that when you turn the wheels, that your tire isn't going to turn into the fender and bust out the side of your fender. And this one, with the suspension dropped, we still got it clearance. I've had other kits with deeper drop fenders that have had the sides of them busted out because guys drop their air and then they forget about it and make a turn, and that fiberglass just doesn't hold up to a moving truck. And so yeah, just a consideration you need to be really mindful of. So here, job's done, saying goodbye to the truck. I did talk to the customer here in the week after he took it and started using it. He's thrilled to death with it. He loves the ride. It's way better. It's not loose or, you know, darting from side to side. It's not loose in the corners and stuff. He said it just, for being a air ride steer, it's a fabulous ride, and he's super happy for spending the money on it. So if you appreciate this video, if you liked it and want to see more, make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, everybody.